Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Movement Prescription Podcast. It's a podcast dedicated to the power of physical activity. My name is Dr. Hussain and I'll be your host for this episode. In today's episode, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Andrew Boyd. Now, Andrew's someone that I've known for a little while now and an inspiration to me when I first started lifestyle medicine. He has led the team at the Royal College of GPs in terms of the lifestyle and physical activity team and launched projects like the Parkrun Practice and the Active Practice Charter, initiatives that many of you will know. And in today's episode, we're going to be speaking to Andrew to find a little bit about his career, how it all started, his interests in physical activity, and also discuss some of the key topics that you've put to us regarding where it sits in primary care today. So please let me introduce Andrew. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Hussain. I'm really good, thanks. Coming to you from New Zealand. Really good. I'm really excited to be on the podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. And so, Andrew, if we can just start by getting to know a little bit about you. So can you just give us sort of a whistle-stop tour of your sort of career in primary care to where we are today?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I'm what you call a mid-career GP now, sadly. But I always loved general practice when I did it as like the house officer and then in the kind of pilot F2 years as they were back then. But I didn't want to kind of rush into becoming a fully fledged GP. So I kind of did some other bits and pieces along the way. I did work in New Zealand, where I'm working now, for a year. I did my GP training in Dorset, and tacked on an extra academic year where I got quite interested in GP education and the kind of concept of leadership in healthcare. Then went with my now wife to work on an NHS leadership program in Cambodia, and did 6 months of that, and then 6 months cycling around Southeast Asia, and then came back from that, and that was 2012, and that's when I qualified as a GP proper, and then thought I'd better get a sort of properish job. So we moved to London, and I worked in a GP practice there, initially as a salary doctor and then as a partner, until I left to come and see how life was on the other side of the world as a GP. It's surprisingly quite similar. But along the way, as well as just regular general practice, I'd always, my kind of slightly hectic, chaotic mind needed something else to interest me and entertain me, and physical activity has been a very important part of my life, for all of my adult life, for my mental and physical well-being, and I managed to carve out a bit of a career as a kind of portfolio lifestyle doctor, I guess. Initially doing as one of the teachers on the Public Health England PHE's Clinical Champions programme, where we taught lots of people about physical activity, mainly healthcare professionals and other allied kind of types along the way. And that's still going strong as to the best of my knowledge. And then on the back of that, I managed to get the gig as the RCGP physical activity and lifestyle lead, along with my friend and colleague Zoe Williams, who's gone on to very big things as a kind of media TV medic. And I think today we're going to talk a bit about that, what that roles entail. But that kind of brings me to where I'm at the moment.
Fantastic. That's really useful. Yeah, the Champions program is still very much alive and kicking. And can we start there, if that's okay? Just tell us a little bit about that role, because many people listening may not know much about it, and it may be something that they're interested in sort of signing up themselves.
Yeah, so it came on the back of I think a 2010 paper that PHE did. Don't quote me on the date. Called Everybody Active Every Day. It might have been a bit later than that, actually. Possibly it was kind of Olympics legacy stuff. Anyway, which was, when I look back now, and I appreciate I might being a bit of an echo chamber when it comes to kind of the chat around physical activity. But really, it was quite innovative. Really, it was just about using healthcare professionals to get people who might not necessarily be moving very much in their day-to-day life moving a bit more. It really was as simple as that. And educate, and a key element was moving healthcare professionals. So teaching healthcare professionals about the basics, the nuts and bolts of physical activity, the nuts and bolts of motivational interviewing, of brief behavioural interventions, and just upskilling them to feel comfortable about talking about physical activity or physical inactivity, as they were already comfortable talking about other major risk factors for non-communicable disease, like smoking or drinking, which of course we learned about as part of the history taking at medical school, and other professionals would have learned about in their kind of very like formative years. But physical activity, certainly back in the day when I was at medical school, there was next to no chat about it at all. So it was really just about filling in the gap. We did a lot of teaching, and there is a lot of teaching as part of the Public Health England Clinical Champions Programme directly to medical students and certainly like GP VTS groups. But a lot of the teaching I did, certainly in the kind of inaugural group who was doing the teaching, this sort of initial cadre of people who did that, we were doing lots of teaching to people who were 20 or 30 years, or 10, 20, 30 years after qualifying, and they'd had zero teaching about physical activity, but recognised that it was something that they wanted to upskill in. And it was I was just very fortunate to kind of start looking around for something new to do in the physical activity sphere when those opportunities came up. And that's often the way it is. It's quite serendipitous about kind of getting, I'm sure you have come across this as well, Hussain, but that getting that first kind of break is often quite lucky, but it often comes having applied for or kind of thrown your hat into the ring for other bits and pieces, and eventually found something that fits your skill set and your passions, and taking it when those opportunities come.
Yeah, definitely. Near the end of this episode, we're going to talk about sort of those opportunities and how you can sort of look to carve out a role within this sphere. And that particular role that you had, the champions role, is that something that you learnt a great deal from, or do you feel like it was more that you were sort of doing good work at, if that makes sense? Was it one that you could grow as a clinician?
Oh yeah, I mean it's always. I think it takes, at least to start with, there's a little bit of courage, isn't there, about standing up in front of a group of your peers as a very much in inverted commas an expert on something and teaching. But once you've done that a few times, and it was quite a deliberately proscriptive educational program, I think that's right, because you want to go through the gears in terms of teaching the people that are in front of you and not assuming too much knowledge and all the rest of it. But where I certainly got learning from, the learning that informed future roles, was that there is a really significant group of fellow healthcare professionals out there who really get the value of physical activity, both for their own well-being, and that's often where it comes from, and also having seen the benefit of it for their patients. And we're at, not everyone was fortunate enough to have a kind of, defined role within that, but wanted to build it into their own clinical practice. It's kind of sometimes a bit easier to be in your ivory tower of, physical activity in this case, but actually embedding it in your own practice, whether you're secondary care, primary care, a GP, another healthcare professional, can be really hard because it doesn't really fit into the, or it certainly didn't fit into the existing kind of model of the NHS. But what it really helped me to recognise was that there are a lot of people out. I wasn't a weirdo for wanting to match physical activity and my professional role, and there were a lot of people out there who also wanted to do the same. And it gave me the confidence to go on and do the work as part of the college. And it was the experience of having met lots and lots of colleagues who were kind of up for it that kept me passionate and enthusiastic when we came across inevitable challenges with the RCGP role that you've now taken over from.
I think that's a really good point, because I mean, when I was sort of just working in my surgery before I really connected with the wider community, very much at the beginning of my journey, I did feel like a bit of a weirdo. I was the only person saying, "Why aren't we doing this? Why can't we do this?" And people just looking at you like, what is he on about? And then as soon as you do connect with other people that are doing these things that, feel the same things that you do, it helps so much, doesn't it? It helps massively to motivate you. You can learn from them. You can use them as your sort of sounding board. So I do really recommend to avoid working in isolation. As Andrew said, connect to the various different sort of networks that are out there and explore that. Fantastic.
I always I remember doing a session at, I think, St Peter's, which is in Chertsey, at the psychiatric team there. I cannot remember how I got that kind of gig, because it was a bit of the job was about trying to find groups which were kind of big enough and enthusiastic enough for you to give up an hour of their combined time to or a bit more than that, a couple of hours, to listen to your talk. And there was a psychiatrist who did walking meetings on a treadmill in his office with patients, and they just walked side by side, and I think there was something about the patient being in charge of the speed that they were allowed to walk at. And I just thought it was just brilliant how this guy was just like doing his own little physical activity consultations with his patients in his own thing. He hadn't written it up, he hadn't done anything with it, but I was just blown away by the kind of such a simple innovation, but actually a really cool idea. And he said he'd had some really insightful conversations with patients, and that thing about walking side by side with someone rather than sitting across a desk, that it flattened any hierarchy or any power differential there. And I thought that was just awesome. So yeah, I always remember that chat.
That's a fantastic story. And often it's that kind of impact that I fell in love with it in the first place, because there's so much really complicated stuff that we kind of sometimes need to do in medicine, and it's really difficult and potentially get an outcome. But in lifestyle medicine, often it's just really simple things. You just got to be brave to do something different. I'm sure the first time he mentioned that I'm going to do some treadmill, interviews with patients, you would have been like, he's insane.
And I think he got the treadmills from the kind of psych unit gym because they were just literally there gathering dust.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is ridiculous. And he pulled them up to his office. So it was kind of zero cost, zero risk, just go for it. And of course, and it was particularly pertinent because, of course, the physical health of people with enduring mental illness is so poor statistically. And I know, of course, 20 minutes with your psychiatrist isn't going to change your health outcomes, but it might sow the seed for someone who did it to demonstrate. Much more powerful to demonstrate it like that than to say, oh, and also, did you know that being a bit more physically active can be really helpful for your activity level, for your well-being? So yeah, it's really cool.
100%. Yeah. Like we talk about schizophrenia has a lower life expectancy than type 2 diabetes. 100%.
Absolutely.
Now that's very positive, but I'm going to potentially go a little bit negative now. And given all the news headlines and everything we read, that it seems like our environment seems to be ever and ever increasingly more difficult to establish healthy lifestyles. We're seeing increasing obesity rates. We're seeing increasing morbidity. Life expectancy, in fact, over the last couple of years in the UK, is decreasing. Does that demoralize you? Have we failed? Has lifestyle medicine and that sort of side of things, has that failed? What are your thoughts? I know this is a very difficult question to answer, but I want an answer.
I'll give you an answer. I mean, I think it's far too early to say lifestyle medicine has failed. I mean, there's, of course, there are a lot of our colleagues out there, some of whom have already retired, who have been practicing so-called lifestyle medicine, even if it wasn't called that, for decades and decades. And you can go back as far as Hippocrates, I think, who said that, physical activity and a healthy diet are key to well-being. And so it's been practiced in some guise for time immemorial. But lifestyle medicine as a specialty and as a kind of recognized and important element of healthcare is pretty new. So I think to say it's failed, this early on would be hasty. But you're right that some of the statistics that are coming out are pretty disheartening. I think a kind of to just there's a nuance to the statistic that you quoted. And I think the life expectancy has tailed off for people in the poorest kind of quintile or something like that, rather than everyone. And that just serves, I'm not doing it to be pedantic, but it really serves to remind us all that actually, it's the difference between the haves and the have-nots in society that is becoming wider rather than the health of the entire nation. And that's a really important point. And I guess that's what inspires me and motivates me, that there is this moment where, at least in the UK and in the NHS at the moment, there is still that opportunity to go and see a well-trained, hopefully trustworthy professional and talk about your health for free at the point of access. And if that person can make even a small difference to someone's life trajectory by giving them some advice, by helping empower them to make some positive lifestyle changes, then that's worth doing. And of course, an individual GP or their team, or even all the GPs in the country can't, is going to struggle to stand up to kind of the power of corporate multinationals. But actually, we do have an important, and we sit in a privileged place in society, and we are still a very trusted profession. I think we're still the most trusted profession, there or thereabouts, even if overall trust in the establishment is in decline. We're still much more trusted than lots of other people in society. Yeah. And if we can make that difference, then that's worth doing. And it's not just conjecture and anecdote. I mean, there's good evidence that the number needed to treat to, for example, improve someone's physical activity levels is about 12. So you need to talk to about 12 people about physical activity for one to make a meaningful change. And we compare that to smoking, where it's more like 100. That's pretty good NNT if we're talking about it like an interventional sort of thing. And again, kind of the overall kind of meta-analyses of brief interventions in healthcare for physical activity say that overall they're definitely safe. And they're probably effective and probably cost effective. And I mean, like with lots of science speak, that's kind of sounds a bit damning with faint praise, but actually that's important. If it's safe and it's uncontroversial and it's effective, then let's go for it, And I think there's something about, there's also the things that aren't so measurable by RCTs and meta-analyses, which is that if it keeps that individual doctor going, in terms of if that's something that's important to him or her to talk about and something that they're passionate about, like it is for you and me, then if it keeps us from burning out and keeps us in the job and doing the other bits of the job that we're not so passionate about, well, that's a positive as well. And, there's something about it, potentially about a conversation around something other than just someone's ailments that can be very positive for the kind of doctor-patient relationship as well. So I think there are some more intangible and unmeasurable elements to introducing lifestyle medicine into conversations that are probably additive to the actual what difference has this made to this person's physical activity levels per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And given that there's a lot that we can do in our sort of domain where we work, do you think that potentially we need to explore going upriver more? More of us need to look at potentially, influencing policy, having sort of political sort of nous, if that makes sense. Given that's a key driver for what's causing our patients to come into our rooms. Is that something? Because generally, yeah, of course, there are people that do that, but it's a very, very small percentage. And then if you then whittle down those that have a lifestyle agenda and influence, that's an even smaller group. Do you think this is something that we need to tackle if we genuinely want to try and improve it on a bigger scale?
Yeah, and I've always said, I've always said for the last sort of 10 years, I've been saying that we could play more of an advocacy role as coalface GPs, because we do sit kind of somewhere I don't know if it's unique, but somewhere kind of in that space where not a lot of other people do, between the kind of science of the science of the academic journals and the kind of best guidance and all the rest of it, the kind of real space on the ground, meeting like real people, and also with that kind of trusted place in society. So, and I think back in the day, there were some really good examples of, and I'm sure there still are, but there were some examples of, the local GP being a real advocate for the kind of more disenfranchised, marginalised people in their society. There's some excellent examples of GPs in London who did some particularly. I can't remember. There was a guy who did something in Peckham. I think his name was Dr. Moody. But I might have got that wrong, who did some incredible work supporting the like poor black people in Peckham and improving their lot as a sort of political advocate as well as a healthcare advocate. So I think we could. How we do it is really tricky, and organisations that represent us, like the BMA and like the RSGP, have tried to do some work around that. The voice of the profession, but it's still really, really hard. But I do think that actually, a GP or a group of GPs who are well established in the community, they are listened to. If they go and speak to their MP, or they, speak to members of their, local council or whatever, particularly on block, they do have a voice. They really do. And I'd really encourage people who, if you've got a bit of a political kind of interest about you, then go knock on some doors. And I always say to particularly kind of more junior colleagues who are looking at kind of getting into this space, if you go and knock on a door, that your doctor title, for better or worse, and whether it's fair or not, I don't know, but your doctor and your GP title will get you. That door will always be answered. It may not be, the kind of conclusion of it might not always be where you were hoping to go with it, but someone will always reply. And that's a place of privilege that we should respect, but also, if it's for the right reasons, can exploit as well. So yeah, go for it. I mean, yeah, we should be more advocacy oriented, I think.
Very much agree. And just one example to try and inspire those listening to think about sort of taking that on is where I work is Leamington Spa, which is Warwickshire, and I would cycle from Coventry, where I live, to Leamington Spa, and going from Kenilworth across to Leamington, you have to go over a pretty major junction. I normally have to sort of hold on tight and put in as many watts as I can to cross this ridiculous roundabout without getting killed. And that Kenilworth and Leamington are very closely linked, and a lot of people would travel from one to the other, but they wouldn't cycle because most people weren't as crazy to try this junction as me. But a group of doctors, we went to the local council. We said that, look, a Kenilworth to Leamington cycleway is required. It will help people get more active. They can access more of the shops, etc. And yes, it took about 1.5 years of campaigning and working, but it happened, and they are currently building it right now. So I can't wait to see the finished product once it's there. But we do need to think about things beyond the consultation room. I do genuinely believe that, yes, there's a lot of beautiful things that can happen in that consultation room, but we sometimes need to go a bit further upriver so that we can try to make changes sort of on a wider scale. Fantastic.
That's a brilliant example. I didn't know about that. That's awesome. Hey.
Yeah, no. These kind of little things, they can really help. They can make a big difference. Now, you've moved over to New Zealand. How many months have you been there? It's coming up to 1 year?
10 months or something like that. Yeah.
Now, I know that you spent time there before, but from sort of this year now, how does primary care compare? And specifically, I'm looking at sort of the lifestyle. Like, how much is lifestyle embedded in primary care in New Zealand? Is there much difference? Is it exactly the same? What have your sort of thoughts been?
Pretty similar.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very strange moving across, like, literally as far as you can across the other side of the world. The model of healthcare here is pretty similar. The main difference is that people pay a fee to see us. There is a capitation fee, but there's a significant co-payment that patients make, which changes the dynamic a little bit. But I mean, in terms of lifestyle medicine, very similar. So it's a relatively reactive, Go to your doctor when you're sick. There is a decent amount of kind of preventive medicine in terms of the same sort of things that we have in the UK with vaccines and chronic disease management and that sort of thing. But it is very, very similar model. There is a small and burgeoning lifestyle medicine field. I don't feel particularly well qualified to comment on it because I really have been here in one town, in one practice only. And the last time I was here practicing any medicine was a very, very long time ago in my second year after qualifying, and things have changed a lot. But yeah, it's very similar. There's the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which quite a lot of Kiwis, New Zealanders are signed up to, but that's very Australian centric. And I guess having done a little bit of exploration, I think that kind of the Kiwis who are involved in lifestyle medicine perhaps haven't found their kind of combined voice yet. But there may be stuff going on that I just don't know about. There's certainly that very similar cohort of colleagues, doctors and other healthcare professionals who are passionate about physical activity for their own well-being, who talk to patients about it. And again, some examples of GPs doing some pretty cool stuff here, but in relatively kind of isolated hotspots rather than at scale across the country. If anything, I think practices here are even more kind of individual businesses because they're not, they don't work under the kind of overarching NHS kind of umbrella that we have in the UK. But there are advocacy and union type groups representing the interests of primary care. But I've pinged off some emails, but not heard a huge amount back. A bit like the UK, there's been a lot of change of how healthcare is structured here, and I think people are kind of getting to grips with that and the kind of niceties of and the kind of extras like physical activity. Not that you and I think a lot of people listening to this podcast would consider it an extra, but they're yet to be kind of dealt with in the new organisational kind of setup. So we'll see. But I wonder if that's a question that maybe I could answer better in a year.
Yeah, we'll bring you back. We'll bring you back and recheck that answer.
Yeah.
But as the environment that you're in, do you feel like the patients are better connected with physical activity? Is the infrastructure of the town that you live on better set up? Is the sort of natural landscape we all think of, New Zealand, we think of Lord of the Rings and the incredible mountains and lakes and all that kind of stuff. Like, are those differences there?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that I've moved from inner city, southeast London, with the grime and the, population density and all the stuff about, London, which is wonderful and not so wonderful in equal measure, to very rural New Zealand. And I've moved to a relatively wealthy, relatively kind of homogenous, by which I mean mainly white population area, where a lot of people have moved there specifically because they can access the mountains. So actually people are generally a healthy weight and very physically active. And interestingly, most people are physically active here, irrespective of their kind of, wealth and health status. Most people are pretty active. So I think it just goes to show that if you kind of have a community which is kind of focused on physical activity, then people get active. And it's interesting. There's a huge number of physiotherapists. There's lots of kind of spin-off businesses that support this. And it's not just young people, it's right through. People are still hiking and biking into their 80s, 90s here, which is pretty amazing. But it is not representative of the whole country. There is, just like in the UK, there is huge disparity from north to south. And there are areas where obesity is rife, incredibly. This surprised me, but obesity rates are higher in New Zealand than they are in the UK, which I was amazed about. And that's mainly because it's overrepresented in certain ethnic groups, the Maori and the Pacifica populations here, which again, I'm very poorly qualified to talk about, but there's definitely haves and have-nots, and there's groups who are not well served by existing healthcare and other structures, and they, just like in the UK, are the groups who are going to benefit the most from making even relatively modest changes, because they've got the most to gain. And I guess, just as I'm finding my feet here, I'm interested in how we can serve that population better. Isn't it interesting how you can come actually somewhere very similar in many ways, but actually there are subtle differences. And I think sometimes we might forget how much when you've been embedded in one place for a while, how much you actually know and understand about how a place operates, even if every year you think there's more questions to be answered than you've managed to kind of resolve, but you do increase in knowledge. And I think that knowledge for a local GP who's been somewhere for a long time isn't to be underestimated, whether it's the services that are available, the kind of assets, whatever they might be, and the patients that he or she serves. There's a lot of expertise there which isn't to be underestimated.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Now, one email that we got from it was an ST3, in fact, was that they feel very much isolated in the practice that they're working at, that there's no one else that has particular interest in physical activity and lifestyle medicine, and they want to know, how can they meaningfully make a difference with what they do. They don't feel that they're up for doing any kind of big projects, that kind of stuff. They haven't got that experience. But if you could sort of go back to you right at the beginning of your GP career, like what would your advice be for this person that wants to try and get physical activity into their actual clinical practice? They're doing it themselves in their personal life. Any ideas?
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? And I think particularly if you're at the, kind of bottom of the hierarchy, it's particularly hard. But I think back yourself to start with. You've got to where you've got to by working hard and getting stuff done. So keep that up. I think just to start by being visible about your passion for physical activity and sort of seeing what happens. I mean, cycling in, not being shy about the fact that you're turning up in, lycra, even if you probably change. You get comments, and my nickname at my practice is Sporty Spice, but it kind of gets the conversation going. That alone can sort of start the conversation. And then there's little things that you can do. I asked for a standing desk quite early on in my practice in the UK, and then actually here as well. And that happened. And then that's a talking point for patients and for other members of staff who say, "Oh, I wish I had one of them." And I'm like, well, you can, if I was allowed one, you're allowed one, type thing. If there aren't bike racks there, asking whether that could be installed and using them, starting a habit of, for example, going for a walk at lunchtime and asking anyone else whether they want to come and join you. If you've got a meeting with your supervisor or whoever, say, can we do a walking meeting? And then things just start ticking on. If you're in a practice where, people's backs are against the wall and there is no capacity for any kind of change, and I'd argue that there's very few practices where it's really like that, then that might not be the right practice for you to be in. But hey, you're an ST3 and you're going to be in a new practice pretty soon. But I think those sorts of things can really make a difference. And I've always have a belief that if you start doing that, there'll be someone in a practice of 20 or 30 people who also are kind of on board with that. And once you've got one follower, if you like, then you're not just a lone weirdo, as that YouTube video, the TED Talk video shows. And you can start something. And then I guess it depends on how long you've got and how much time and energy you can devote. But, for example, with the advent of PCNs, there are little pots of funding which come up. And if you've got a little idea for a project, it really doesn't have to be big. If you can be creative about how you pitch it, it could be used as a kind of QI project, and there might be, a few £100 that you could co-opt to, just get some printing done of some leaflets or a banner or a poster or something like that, and try. And I think Hussain and I have talked about this and had a laugh about this before. But whenever you start anything, anything a bit off-piste, don't expect that lots of people can turn up on day one. And Hussain, is the master of starting projects, and most of yours, Hussain, have been, incredibly successful, but they haven't been successful often from day one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I have massive admiration for the fact that you've stuck at these things. But if you start and you believe in it and you're enthusiastic about it, then and credible and honest and committed, then things will happen for sure. They just will. Is that fair? I mean, I think
that's very fair.
Yeah,
it's very fair, and I second that. And one thing I would say is, as you go on this process, start really small. You can't see how, for example, cycling to work and having your helmet on your desk, you can't see how that's going to have an impact. But already the patient's going to see that, as well as the staff, as you mentioned. And then you just keep putting layer on layer. And one thing I'd recommend doing is, when you're, let's say, doing these kind of things, I would promote it. Now, I know, Andrew, you're not massive on social media. You're very much the analog lifestyle GP. But
I'm just old, Hussain.
But I use it quite a bit, and so I'll use it just to promote the kind of work that I'm doing, even if it's small things, just to help inspire other people to do a similar thing. And it's helped me connect with so many different professions within healthcare and within lifestyle. And it also helps you get roles. So I've got lots of now sort of roles within lifestyle medicine, which I didn't have at the beginning, which wasn't like a catalogue that you could pick from going, oh yeah, this is a job in lifestyle medicine. Because I think that's something that a lot of people get confused about, because let's say they do the BSLM diploma, and that's fantastic, but then they're going to like, what do I do now? How do I utilize that? But if you try to promote the work you're doing, look to develop these kind of projects, then people will reach out. And I've been inundated, to be honest, with those kind of roles. You just have to make sure that you put the work you're doing out in the sphere that these kind of companies and sort of and sort of healthcare establishments are looking at, and then you will start to build up that portfolio. It doesn't come instantly, unfortunately.
Absolutely, and even if you want to be a bit more traditional about it, I mean, it's a little bit. It's an allied area of interest of mine around social prescribing, and I did a what we termed a walk, map, learn project with my practice, where we walked around local kind of assets. There were a couple of physical activity ones, but also churches and cafes and that sort of thing. Just kind of a quarter of a mile or half a mile kind of diameter, like from the practice, the radius, I guess, from the practice, and mapped them. And it could have just been sitting on the wall of the practice, kind of gathering dust. And it was quite a nice thing to do at the time. But we actually turned it into a poster and took it to a conference, and then suddenly you've got like a poster at a conference on your CV. And again, that's just something to talk about. And it doesn't sound like much in of itself, but actually these are the little things that just get you noticed when you're going for an interview or whatever, and the other thing I'd also say is that if an opportunity comes up, again, it's very unlikely to be your dream role right from the get-go, and sometimes it's about being creative with what you do with that role, and how you can make it fit the things that you want. A lot of non-clinical GPE type roles, particularly around social prescribing and that sort of thing, they're quite flexible. They just want someone who's passionate and is going to work hard, and you can make of it what you will, actually. Obviously, there will be some core bits that you have to do, but there's generally some creativity and flexibility about it, and you get kind of generally given quite a lot of pre-approval to kind of crack on and do your thing. So even if something doesn't look absolutely perfect on paper, look at it through very positive eyes, and you might see that actually you can really make this work for you. And even if that role's not the dream one, then the next one might be, because you've taken a few more steps above the other poppies in the field.
Yeah, that's perfect. And at the sort of annual conferences, for example, with Ask GP, they're always eager to sort of showcase these kind of projects and these poster submissions. So definitely, get involved. And social prescribing, I think, is a really good outlet. You're right. Like, I'm social prescribing lead at my PCN. It was one of the first jobs that I took up. I'm still doing it because, as you say, you just have so much leeway to make it what you want. And I've embedded physical activity sort of into the very heart of social prescribing, as with the other core principles within it. So, yeah, no, really good points. Now, so another question that we often get asked is, like, what is the best training to do for lifestyle medicine? You know, because there are different things out there, and they do vary in cost and the amount of time that you spend. Now, like, I wondered, did you have any thoughts, Andrew, as to sort of, you know, is it something that you must get training in, or can you acquire it just through experience? Or, you know, what do people do? Especially now with cost of living crisis, you know, sometimes some of these courses are really quite expensive when sometimes the finances are a little bit tighter these days.
I think, I guess, I think if you're kind of practicing lifestyle medicine, you know, in real life with real life patients, I think you need some kind of qualification, basically. Obviously, you know, to start with, you know, a lot of it's not rocket science, and you know, and actually a key part of our role, and one that I think is increasingly taught on VTS schemes, is about you know, positive lifestyle change and behavior, and you know, brief behavioral interventions and that sort of stuff. But I think if you're kind of describing yourself as a lifestyle clinician, I think you need something to back that up. It's important to be kind of credible and honest to yourself and your patients. I would say this as a diplomate of the lifestyle medicine, sort of, you know, certificate of lifestyle medicine.
Yeah.
I always forget the actual letters, but it's a really good, comprehensive, manageable piece of work. Yes, there's some cost. I appreciate that, but often that can be recouped from study budgets and that sort of thing. And it does give you you know, some letters after your name that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And it does, you know, I certainly learnt perhaps not a lot about physical activity, but certainly about the other pillars of lifestyle medicine that I just didn't know about before I'd done the diploma. And with the BSLM in the UK and the equivalent organisations elsewhere, it does give you access to a body of, you know, other similarly minded and actually extremely positive people who, you know, in a profession which is, you know, a bit doom and gloom in lots of ways, is incredibly positive. The last thing I did before I left the NHS and the UK last year was to go to the BSLM conference, and it was just such a positive, you know, happy, fun event. And you know, I really was like, I was actually really sad to be leaving such an amazing group of people. So yeah, so, you know, it's not essential, and certainly if you're just sort of dabbling in getting an interest, well, you know, read some of the textbooks, listen to some of the podcasts and all that sort of thing. But I mean, but we need to, if we want lifestyle medicine to be taken seriously, and we want it to have the sort of robustness that is needed if it's going to be a kind of true medical specialty in its own right, and a pillar of healthcare, we need to make sure that people who are practicing it are trained like they would for anything else. You know, if you're a GP with a special interest in dermatology or MSK stuff, you'd have a qualification. So why not lifestyle medicine?
Yeah, I think that final point is probably the most important bit, isn't it? Because we want to show that this isn't just a sort of a fairy kind of a profession. You know, this is serious. It's backed by science and data, and that's the element that I would say makes it important to get that. And we'll have links, you know, at the end of this podcast for you to access. For example, the core accreditation Andrew just mentioned there. With regards to lifestyle medicine, there are other places you can get further training. There's, for example, GP Update are doing a half-day lifestyle course. If you're looking, as Andrew was saying, sort of earlier on, just to sort of explore your interests and that kind of thing. And there are various other sort of half-day and full-day courses that you can attend. A lot of them are funded, so it's free to attend. But I'd say the aim is, as you go through your career, look to make the kind of the full diploma you're on the agenda, if this is really kind of the area of medicine that you want to work in. Okay, and you touched on there getting potentially funding. So yes, you can get funding for these kind of qualifications. I got my funding through, in fact, the active partnership. So when I wanted to launch a project to have group consultations, lifestyle consultations with patients, as part of that funding, I allocated that I would need training in order to complete the diploma and then complete the group consultation. So that's how I did it. And it works really well because, yeah, it's a chunk of money. And so I'd think about how you could combine it with a project that you want to do. And as part of that project design, it includes you being trained up to deliver the sessions. It can often be, it shows a more robustness to the design that you want to do because you're showing that you're going to be developing skills in the area that you're going to try to implement the intervention with. So yeah, that's one way you could do to try and get that.
I think that's a great way of you're nothing if not good at accessing pots of money.
Yeah.
But I've heard of some people who've gone like hard for their practice on it. So I think that's quite a nice way to do it. So saying, look, I want to be the lifestyle kind of lead for the practice. And if you get some buy-in from your partners, in the scheme of things, half of the price of the diploma for a general practice of 15,000 patients is not a lot of money,
and it just goes against the tax liability. So it's all good.
Exactly, it's doable. So I guess, and that's just a reminder to to be kind of bold about asking for stuff. It's okay. It's not something we talk very much about at medical school, certainly, and it's not a kind of very certainly GP kind of go get 'em type way of behaving. But you can always ask. And at least you've floated that idea. And sure, I've been in a position as a partner and as a salary doctor, and I'm back at salary doctor level here. But you can always ask, and at least you've floated that idea and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this," and offered a kind of solution or a kind of like mini business model, and see what they say. And and if they say no, well then okay, fine. But they might say not this year, but maybe next year, and then you can go back again and say, hey, do you remember what you said last year? It works.
Totally.
It generally works.
It does. No, totally. and I think that you mentioned sort of like having a business model. That's really important because you got to show them what is that money going to get them. If it's just training you up, then that's not much. But if you say that, look, you would then want to develop some kind of way of implementing it for the patients at your practice, then yes, they're going to want to do that. I think more and more now in both the QOF, we have a lot more QI, and these kind of projects will help the practice get money and tick those boxes. And also, if in the current climate of the low number of GPs, retaining GPs is something that practices really want to do. So if they feel that, do you know what, we want to develop, Dr. X's time here, we want to make sure that they're a valued member, they are going to look to see what they can do to support that. So yeah, use that. And as Andrew said, be brave, and just, you're not going to lose much in floating the idea out there. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the podcast, and I think I've learned a great deal from it, and thank you so much, Andrew. As sort of like a closing thought, when you look out the window, metaphorically, are things gloomy or is it sunshine in terms of how physical activity is being incorporated generally? Let's focus on the UK, in the UK, like, is it a positive outlook going forwards, and we're going to see things slowly improve, and we've got all the sort of tools that we require to take us on that journey? Or are you concerned that there's thunderstorms ahead?
I love the metaphor. I mean, I think what's interesting is when I look back, I alluded to it at the start, but when I look back to the kind of conversations we were having and the kind of level at which the conversation was at, within my career, not just as a doctor, but as a GP. And I think partly that illustrates the fact that I'm definitely no longer first 5 or even probably not in first 10 now. And I'm just about first 10. But it's, physical activity specifically is definitely a recognized, or physical inactivity rather, is a really well recognized risk factor for NCDs, non-communicable diseases, and I think most people get that's kind of fairly uncontroversial. And I think it was still a bit of a Cinderella kind of risk factor not that long ago. So I think, the trajectory is one of it being much more mainstream. It's something that a lot of our colleagues ask about pretty routinely in consultations, something that patients expect to be asked about, just like it was back in the day with smoking and drinking and that sort of thing. It's kind of part of the consultation for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people. So that's positive. I think what the storm clouds, if there are some, and again, I alluded to it, is that the people who are going to benefit the most from being a bit more physically active are the people who are least active. And that tends to be people who have got existing health conditions, often multiple comorbidities, people who are poorer, who are femaler, who are blacker, all of the things that put you in a more in a more difficult place in society from the get-go means that you're less likely to be physically active, and it comes back to what you said about how life expectancy has tailed off for, and is even in decline for, the most have-nots in our society, and they're the people for whom the storm clouds are. For the kind of people who earn money and who earn decent money and all the rest of it. There's Strava, there's Peloton, there's fancy gym memberships and all the rest of it. They're going to be okay, but it's whether society has still got enough appetite and can find enough financial support to make it as easy as possible, perhaps as undifficult as possible for the least active to move a bit more every day. And that's where I think the storm clouds are. And, and that's probably beyond the scope of this podcast and possibly beyond the scope of our profession. But it probably needs some significant political change if that's going to come about, because we've, lived through a time of increasing inequality in the UK, and I guess also COVID did put the kibosh for a lot of people on getting more physically active, and we're still, I think the latest data says we're still kind of coming back from that. For a lot of people, it was a kind of time when physical activity really tailed off, and for a lot of people, it hasn't come back because it's coincided with the cost of living crisis, and gym memberships and that sort of thing aren't a priority for if you're struggling to put food on the table. So yeah, there are storm clouds, but I remain optimistic, and I think that particularly active travel and active commuting and that sort of thing is important for people's health, for air quality, and for kind of climate change in general, which is an existential threat to our population. So we need to keep fighting the good fight.
Beautifully put, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it's a bit doom and gloom.
No, that was perfect. No, that was perfect. Thank you, and we'll all appreciate that. So thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Just pleasure.
A few bits
Always a
for
pleasure.
the audience. We've got a new article, in fact, published on the 9th of July from the team of the RCGP in the article Innovate, and it's on nutrition and physical activity. So how we can embed the conversations within our consultations on nutrition and how that can support people in getting active. And also, for those of you attending the annual conference this year, which is on October 19th and 20th, on the 20th in the morning at 7 o'clock outside the venue in Glasgow, we will be hosting a walk and a run. So it'll be fantastic to see you guys there and to connect with you. So please come say hello and share your ideas with us. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for jumping on the show today. And I hope those listening at home took some, useful points there to embed that physical activity into your consultations and beyond. I think that's the key message. And I would say the summary from what you said, Andrew, is you've got to start small, make little steps, but keep pushing forwards, and you will eventually get to a place that maybe you're envisaging or dreaming of sort of right now in terms of lifestyle medicine. There is no kind of job you can apply for. You kind of have to carve it out yourself. Brilliant. Thank you so much, and take care.
Pleasure.